Hello, everybody. My name is Myriam Martinez, and I'm really, really happy to be here. Thank you, Dr. Amba, for the privilege of being here with all of these amazing women. I am an art therapist and an art-based coach based out of Northern California, and I have been in the mental health field for over 20 years now. And I really, really love and thrive on helping women learn how to tap into what I call their wild, which means just waking up to their lives, taking responsibility for themselves, igniting their inner knowing, developing trust in themselves, loving themselves fiercely, and daring to be unapologetically themselves. And today, what I want to talk about is one of the biggest challenges I think that we all contend with, which is the inner critic. And one of the things that I enjoy most about addressing this issue is just naming it out front. So many people struggle with this, but don't really want to talk about it or don't really want to address it because there's a lot of maybe shame or embarrassment that they're dealing with this, especially if you've done a lot of interpersonal work, it can show up in that way. But there's a couple things that are working against us just as being humans that we need to be able to understand. And my idea or my intention with this is to help you be a little bit more self-compassionate and self-understanding. So why does the inner critic exist? So what I have seen in my research and in the work that I do is that we have this negativity bias. And I think most of us know about that, but let's just dive in quickly. Our brain is programmed to look at the negative just as a survival mechanism. So we're already set up to, be challenged by that brain activity. And then we also have this phenomenon that where it exists as a defense mechanism, essentially. So if there's a hardship, if there's pain in any kind of way, including emotional pain, our brain wants to protect us, and our survival brain will get the inner critic going as a way to distract us from pain. How weird is that? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, I know, but this is what's happening a lot of the time. So when we get into our brain and we start getting into all of these negative thoughts, weirdly enough, we're not feeling our feelings anymore. We're just in our head. But of course, that works against us because we have then more feelings about the negative thoughts that we're having, and then we get into a loop. And then we have internalized criticism, like criticisms that we've experienced and internalized from our upbringing, whether it be from our caregivers or teachers or any other kind of, important adults in our life. We inadvertently criticize. I think most people don't mean to be critical, and yet sometimes we find a way to do it without meaning to. And I think that's a lot of children's experience. I've worked with kids for over 30 years, and that's often what I notice is the issue in the parenting dynamic. So here we have all these things that are kind of just built into us in a way, right? So that's something that we have to work hard against. Then there's the part about not being connected to your worth, which Fran was already talking about a little bit ago. And if we don't have a sense of our worth, then we have a dependency on our value from external resources. And so internally, this voice can just take over rampantly. And then it becomes kind of a habit, like a really bad habit. Something hard happens, you're struggling in some way, and boom, here comes the inner critic, right? To make things far worse as far as I'm concerned. So what happens next, I'm looking at some notes, I'm sorry, is thinking about how we can start taming the inner critic is the word that I like to use. And there's a few ways that we can do that. And the first and foremost for all of us, especially as women, is setting yourself up for success, knowing your strengths and knowing your limitations, right? So oftentimes we're asking more of ourselves than is reasonable, than is realistic. And then when we can't accomplish that, or we don't accomplish it in a way that we feel good about, then we start beating ourselves up. So let's start from the very beginning, setting ourselves up for success. And being able to know what your strengths are is really important so that you can celebrate them. Be aware, this is something that I'm good at, and really try to feed on that. And of course, being aware of your limitations lets you know, like, maybe I'm not really going to be good at talking about this or working on X, Y, or Z, right? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Just know what that is for you. Celebrate your successes and your wins. So we have this tendency in our fast-paced society to go from one thing to the next and to the next and to the next. And often we end the day feeling kind of unfulfilled or feeling like we didn't do anything, quote unquote. But if we really stop for a second and go, wow, I just completed this thing. Like when we're done with this event today, to take a few minutes and say, wow, I really did that. I attended or I presented, whatever it was, and giving yourself that credit is incredibly important to help you feel stronger in yourself, and more confident. Accept that you're imperfect, accept that you're human. Like that is such a thing. There's a part of our brain that's like, of course I know that. But yet there's these patterns that we get ourselves into that kind of reflect the opposite. So just being really aware of that. It's a very, very sneaky dynamic. I know it sneaks up on me oftentimes, and I just have to keep that awareness of how it's showing up for me. Practice self-compassion. Like this is, I can't emphasize this part enough, right? So if one of your good friends says, hey, I really screwed up today, or I really feel terrible, or whatever is happening with them, you're not going to be mean to them. You're not going to say unkind things to them. You're going to say, I'm so sorry. What can I do? Right? Things like that. And this is then the development of your inner soother, right? Which is the other voice, this other voice that we're trying to strengthen, that is kind and compassionate to us. It says, hey, it's okay, right? You're okay. You're okay. Keep going, right? A little bit of encouragement. And the last thing that I think is important in terms of taming is exercising your right brain. And what that usually looks like is being able to use the art process to externalize the inner critic. So if I could share my screen briefly, is that okay? You got to let me share. It's not letting me share.
Trying to figure out how to make you a co-host from where I'm at.
Oh, bummer. Okay.
I would have to take you off for a moment
Okay,
and
let's
stop.
not do that then.
Okay.
Let's not do that. I'll just talk about it. Okay.
Okay.
So essentially, when you use the art process, and I think it was Fran and I that were talking about it, like it has really absolutely nothing to do with your art ability or skill. I am not a trained artist. That is not why I got into the field of art therapy. I got into the field of art therapy because I wanted to help people. That's it. Right. So to use art in this way, right, is immediately helpful because you get out of your head. It's not about like how it's going to look or what's going to happen. Is there a right? Is there a wrong? All the dumb things that we always do, right? The way that we get into our heads. And so when you use the art process, to externalize this, now you can have a different relationship. So I would invite somebody to like draw a picture of their inner critic. Like, what would it look like if you could see it? What would it be like to sit across from it in a chair and just go, so, hey, what's going on with me and you, right? And now you're beginning to relate to your inner critic in a different way, And what happens here is that you begin to have more agency over yourself in the dynamic, right? Because normally it's an automated response. It just kind of pops in, it takes over, and you got frustrated and all these things, right? You have to work hard to get back. But when you invite the inner critic in, now the dynamic changes. Now you can say, actually, I do want to talk to you. Right. It's on my terms now, though, right? How do I want to do that? And, maybe you guys need to duke it out a little bit. Maybe some compassion needs to happen, right? Because I'm sure the inner critic, if you remember what I said before, if like it could talk, it might say, I'm just trying to protect you. Right? And you're like, okay, thank you. And I don't really need that kind of protecting anymore. Right? So that's one way that you can work with the inner critic. And I will tell you the same thing with the inner soother. Can you imagine a voice that says, hey, you're okay. You're good. Right? You're a good person. You didn't do anything wrong. You can keep going, right? You're still worthy and lovable and all the things. And then maybe create an image around that, right? So that you're kind of starting to build that. And what I want really people, like we keep talking about, is just that everything takes time and patience, right? So the inner critic will come in and your job is just to notice that it's paying you a visit. And, can you just gently say, I acknowledge you. Thanks for the visit. And, inner soother, come on in, just come on in also, right? And you're just like gently, gently, gently changing the mindset structure there, right? And changing some neural pathways. And then we begin to have more of an experience and a connection to our inner soother versus our inner critic, right? And the hard thing about the inner critic is that it likes to wait when we're at our worst, our deepest, deepest, darkest moments to go, you suck, right? And it's like, oh, geez, really? Why? But we can work through that if we can just acknowledge, right? That's what's happening. It's just showing up. It's okay. It's trying to tell me all these things. Maybe I can bring my image out, or if I'm somewhere where I don't have my image, can I doodle it real quick? Can I look at it, right? Any way that I can just interact with it in a different way, right? And it's very, very empowering when you can interact with your inner critic in this way. So one of the things that I want to leave everybody thinking with, like a prompt question, might be, what would I like my inner soother to say to me? Right? I mean, it's not often something we think about. And at least in the inner critic workshops I've done, it's really about like, what does the inner critic say, which is fine, you can get to know that as well. But what about your inner soother? How do you want to be spoken to? How do you talk to someone when they're in a struggle? Right? And begin to really put that into a practice. It's like everything is a practice, right? And that's how we're going to make some shifts. And if you go onto my website, you can access my free Wild Doodling for Stress Busting workshop. It's a 3 email series where just like in everything that I do, I integrate neuroscience and mindfulness and body awareness and the art, to help you understand A, the importance of that practice, and B, how it can help you move forward in so many different ways. So if you want to get a hold of me, if you have questions, I'd love to answer them. You can also find me on social media just about anywhere and follow me. I like to put out a lot of info on this kind of stuff. But if you have questions, you can email me at Myriam@MyriamMartinezCoaching.com, and I'd be happy to talk about all things art and well-being. So thank you for having me.